30% of the CSU teacher preparation programs are still using that to teach.
Ooh.
Yes.
Okay.
And we know from research that that does not work, and it's being used. And that's what's being taught to teacher preparation programs, pre-service teachers.
Hello and welcome to Conscious Pathways, a podcast where we explore the intersection of education and social justice through transformative conversations. I'm your host, Brittany, and I am so excited to have you here today. I do want to give a special shout out to my Patreon subscribers. Hello, Patreon subscribers who get this podcast episode early. You also get access to Ask an Expert, where you can ask me or one of my special guests a question that I can answer live on the podcast here, along with a whole lot of other special goodies. So if you're curious about that, you can check out the show notes below and check out Patreon. Today, I am joined by Dr. Denise Kennedy. Dr. Denise Kennedy is a professor and department chair of early childhood studies at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. She holds a master's degree in clinical psychology and marriage and family therapy and a PhD in human and community development from the University of Illinois. She completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of Michigan in developmental psychology and contributed to the longitudinal study on family transitions. Dr. Kennedy's research centers on enhancing the social and emotional development of children and families in the context of sibling, parent-child, and marital relationships, with a particular attention to how children learn to regulate emotions. The scope of her research has expanded recently to focus on parents' and teachers' efficacy and the belief that they will be able to work successfully with young children. This new research is also focused on dual language learner competencies and college student sense of belonging. Dr. Kennedy has such an inspiring background in research and in education. She has such a passion for education and teaching students, especially around early childhood education. So it was just such a wonderful conversation to have. So let's hop into it. Hello and welcome to Conscious Pathways. I am joined by Dr. Denise Kennedy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brittany. It's my pleasure to be here.
I am so excited. This is so great. Is it really cloudy where you guys are right now?
Yes. It's cloudy and it's in the low 60s.
Oh, same.
Same?
Same. We have June gloom, which I think it's kind of all over Southern California, but just the June gloom, it's glooming. So.
Yeah, it's definitely that.
Yes. I'm excited to get more sunshine, but also taking advantage of the not questionable amounts of heat. So
yes,
I'll take it easy for now.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got your start in education and kind of what interests you specifically around early childhood education?
Absolutely. I started with the idea that I wanted to become a clinical psychologist, and I received my master's degree in clinical psychology and marriage family therapy, and I was doing therapy in elementary schools. So I did art and play therapy with children, and I loved being in that context. But my personality is one that I could not leave work at home. So I worried.
Yep.
I worried about the children. It gave me a huge respect for the teachers and what they do week in and week out, because I was basically the person on the school grounds that any disruptive child in a classroom was sent to me. And it wasn't
must have been very busy then.
This was a while ago, so it was really interesting in that things that teachers do not have the bandwidth for. You have a large classroom of children, and if someone's disrupting that, so it enabled me to find things such as, during reading, a child might act out, and he didn't need to see me as the therapist or counselor, but he needed to go to the reading specialist because he could not read.
Yeah.
So, and the teachers sometimes, some teachers, do this, but some don't have the time to discern, what is happening with this child. And in addition to that, you have the very emotional, the very difficult family life of children. So there were kids I had that I had no idea if I would see them the next week, if they would be alive. It was that bad. And it wore on me. So I decided to go back and get my PhD. And I decided I would create intervention programs to help children, but then also teach others to work with the children directly. So I didn't have an ulcer if I continued to do what I was doing, but I really loved it. It was heartbreaking. It was very heartbreaking, and so I got my PhD and I created a program. It's called the More Fun with Sisters and Brothers program. And it's for siblings, but it really focuses on teaching children how to regulate emotion and how to take perspective. And I did it in the context of the sibling relationship because that's the most volatile relationship. So if you can get along with your sibling, you can get along with anybody, and it will translate into every relationship in your life. So that's why I did that. It's
I feel that.
Yeah, and I worked with 4 to 9-year-olds in my intervention. So it was a 6-week intervention with lots of home visits. And I did that at the University of Illinois. It's still running. And my advisor actually started it as an online program for parents and families.
Wow.
And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship, and I did that at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I worked on a study. It's called the Family Transition Study. And it was a really developmental study. So it was basically looking at when a mother's pregnant with her second child, and then the first year when that baby's born, I think we had like 10 home visits or 10 visits with the families. And we did everything from the strange situation to see what the attachment was like. We did it with mothers and with fathers.
Okay.
And then we did a lot of other things, like how does empathy develop? How does sympathy develop in children? What is their self-concept like? So most of my experience has been developmental in nature and also assessment in nature. And I did not start out thinking I wanted to be an educator. But when you are in a doctoral program, you have to teach and you have to do research. And I am very much introverted. And so standing up in front of a classroom was not my ideal job. But I found that I always knew more than my students did because I prepared. And so it gave me a little ease and peace of mind and not so much stress. It probably took about 5 or 6 years before I didn't get butterflies before every class. But I found that, so I am the one person in my program that has not been a teacher in a classroom. So I've been in elementary classrooms, middle school classrooms, but more in the context of observing, or doing assessments or doing the therapy outside of the class. So I'll pull the children out of the classroom and then go to the therapy room. So it's something that I think is so important to understand a child. And one of the things, when I teach in my courses, most of my students now at Cal Poly Pomona want to be teachers. And when I teach the basic development class, child growth and development is in California is kind of the basic foundational class that has the theories. But I let them know that a child is not born bad, or a child is not born disruptive. And so it's so important to understand every context of that child. Their family, where do they live? What is their culture? Who's the support around them? are there supports around them? Things
Yes.
like that. And so having that in-depth understanding is so important in a classroom, with children. And sometimes the child just needs one adult. And research shows that, children are very resilient, but having that one adult there that they can feel safe with and trust and talk to can make a huge difference in the world. And so those are the types of things I try to impart on my students as they go out into the field to teach.
Yes. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about education is that it can happen in a variety of contexts, right? So when we think about teaching, we usually just think about being in the classroom and that's how you make the impact on the students. But there are so many people within the school community that also interact with these children and also can have really profound interactions and really profound impact from, the janitorial staff, from the kitchen staff and the principal, assistant principal, the admin, right? Like everyone who's, in that environment interacts with the children in some way and can make a really meaningful impact on their lives. And I think that's the beauty of it when we kind of, move our lens out a little bit on like what it means to teach. Like our community is a part of our teaching practice. And I think that's something that we talk about a little bit more in the early childhood sphere. And like you said, the development, we talk a lot about development. We talk a lot about theory in early childhood. And it gives us like this really well-rounded understanding of where this child is coming from.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole child, right? We look at the whole child. And I think that's the biggest difference between early childhood and our K-12 system. And I keep every meeting I'm at now, when people say K-12, I always correct them and say, I'm sorry, it's TK-12 now. We're in California, it's TK-12. You need to remember the early childhood kids because they're part of it now.
Yep, they are a part of it now. And that's part of the reason how, we came to meet each other was at a conference and we were talking about TK. And as you mentioned with California, we've expanded our TK. We've been doing TK for a couple of years, but we have expanded it now for all 4-year-olds to have access to transitional kindergarten, which is now a part of the school district. So they're, they are in there now.
Yeah, they're there.
And so they're there. And so it's so important that we are being mindful and that we are talking about, our early childhood. And as, we know early childhood extends, even further into, the school year. So up to about 3rd grade is usually around that early childhood, age range. And so I love that we're having more conversations about early childhood and that we're engaging in more of these, like, let's talk about the development. Let's talk about, these young children and not just 4-year-olds. Like, I know we need to talk about 3-year-olds because just because you turned 4 yesterday does not mean that you're going to act like a 4-year-old today.
Exactly. And, there are districts that are enrolling 3-year-olds into TK.
Yes. Yeah. Which is, it's a thing.
Scary. I'm sorry. It's scary. It scares me.
It is. That scares me too. I feel deeply concerned, especially with how the rollout of TK has gone thus far this past year or so. It's just kind of happened. And I feel like we needed to take a couple of steps before we just started enrolling 4-year-olds into TK, and we didn't take those steps. We are looking at making those steps now. So, I think the state of California is recognizing that, okay, there's some people who need to be in the room. There's some things we need to put in place. So they're making some changes that will, overall happen over the next couple of years. But, as an early childhood educator, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, yeah, but there's children in those classrooms right now, like today. It's great that, in a year or two from now, you have these things going into effect and all, TK educators are going to have these, these classes and all of the people who are interacting with this age range are going to have this training. That's amazing. I want to see that, but I need to see that today.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes. So, do you want to give the audience a little bit of an overview of kind of the current state in early childhood education and what we've been doing, in California for TK and kind of where we are in general right now?
There's so much. I don't know where to start.
There's so much.
One of the things I think that I've been working on and a lot of my colleagues have been working on is this uh, PK through third grade. Um, I think it's called PK through third grade early childhood education specialist instruction credential. It's like a mouthful.
It's always a mouthful.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to short it to PK3 credential.
Perfect.
That has been happening over the last several years. And it was approved by the Office of Administrative Law for April 1st. And with that, programs, and when I say programs, I mean higher ed programs, are submitting proposals to the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing to approve that so that that institution can offer that credential.
Mhm.
Child development programs at the baccalaureate level are the ones that will meet subject matter for that credential. So that is the preferred pathway is a bachelor's degree in an associate's degree from a community college or a freshman coming into a bachelor's program where there are classes in child development, and then that BA program you can then go into the credential program. Now, the way this credential was rolled out, and I think I mentioned this in my presentation, it was to appease, and I think like anything, politics plays a role in every decision that's made. Often, again, the implementation of it is not well thought out, and there are many issues with this credential. The first is that there are two options. So I said option one is where child development programs meet subject matter as the root and the base of this credential. The second option is for multiple subject credential holders to take any 24 units, and then they can apply for that credential and get it. And it's 24 units in child development, and it could be anything that would not be relevant to them teaching in that TK classroom, but it counts because it says it's a child development class. So it could be how to write a resume in child development, and that would count. That has been one of the things that has really impacted us in higher ed in many ways. Many liberal studies programs. So liberal studies meets the subject matter for the multiple subject credential. And there was legislation passed, AB 130, Assembly Bill 130, where if your degree program is called liberal studies, liberal arts, or elementary education, those students do not have to take the CSET exam, which is the exam that has 3 parts that meet subject matter. So the commission is trying to reduce barriers for teachers, potentially. And we know these high stakes tests are barriers oftentimes, and they're very expensive. So what a lot of programs want is, for example, the liberal studies programs might want my program to create some 24 units for their students. But because what I can offer them, because they're not in my program, are lower division, meaning more basic type of courses versus our upper division that go into depth and breadth, where we actually give our students in higher ed pedagogical skills. This is how you teach algebra to a child. This is, this is how you teach a child to read. We give those pedagogical skills. So the student in my classroom has to understand math and science and language and literacy, but they also have to be given skills to teach them. And that's the biggest difference. And I think that's what's missing. And that's where many of us have been advocating to push up early childhood into the primary grades versus this push down that's happened. And that's kind of what's been happening. Yeah. That's the main thing that we've been focusing on. Legislatively, there has been so much funding going into LEAs or the school districts.
Mhm.
They've been given so much money for early childhood, um, for TK in particular, and I don't know what it's been utilized for, honestly. Um,
Yeah, I couldn't tell
and
you.
yeah, but I think the idea was they were going to get 13,000 teachers that they needed to
Mhm.
fill that school year last year, and they didn't even come close to that number. So the governor pulled back
Mm.
some of that funding.
Okay.
Um, Rather than allocate that for infrastructure and things that
Yeah.
schools need, furniture for 3 and 4 year
Yeah.
olds, bathrooms for them, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, that was not done. So I think that's something that needs to get worked on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the infrastructure part, like we talked about, TK's been around for a minute, but now it's available for all 4-year-olds and even some 3-year-olds. And, you know, I don't know many 3-year-olds who are extremely proficient on using the bathroom 100% on their own, like, with the wiping
Right.
and everything, who don't need any specific help. Oftentimes they do still need a little bit of assistance with these types of things. And,
Right.
within the school district, you just can't. That's the kind of different than in early childhood. In early childhood, we're still able to help, toileting and things like that if they need
Yes.
it.
Yes.
But once they're in the school district, teachers just aren't able to do that.
Yeah. Or they
So
refuse. Yeah.
yes, yeah, or they can refuse it, and then you just have these very concerning situations with these very young children, and like
Yeah.
they're trying, but developmentally they're still working on the motor skills. They're still
Yes.
working on the strategies to be able to do that on their own, but they're still learning, right? They've only
Right.
been on this planet for like 3 or 4 years. Like, it takes time.
Yes. You're
you
absolutely
know
right.
it
Yes.
takes time, and
It
just the
does.
infrastructure on that, the thought of like, okay, you're just going to give a pass to this 4-year-old to go to the bathroom, but the bathroom's not close to the classroom. So they're
Yeah.
having to traverse down hallways to get to where they need to go to use these bathrooms that aren't developmentally their
Right.
size.
Exactly. And
um
then you have the 8 or 9 year old in that classroom too, and how
mhm.
does that? It's scary. It's a scary thing.
It
I worry
is,
about
yeah.
trauma and right now for
Yes.
these kids.
Exactly. I worry about that a lot too, thinking about just the developmentally appropriate practices that, may or may not be happening, because we've seen the push down, exactly what you were mentioning, these kind of push down of educators, from, and now kindergarten's essentially the new first grade. And, I don't want TK to become the new kindergarten. It's, where we're just doing things like we're teaching them to read, we're doing all these different things. And it's like, okay, but are we doing this in ways that are developmentally appropriate? Like, do they have the foundational skills to be successful in that? And what kind of trauma is that going to cause? Because there are some kids who can excel in these very academic, very rigid,
Right.
environments, and that's just the way that their brains work, and that's, fine. But that's not going to work for every single child.
No.
So I'm just thinking about the long-term impacts on, their love for learning, their love for school, just kind of getting squashed at such an early age, because they're looking at all their other peers and like, I just can't do that. I can't sit in my desk for this prolonged period of
Right.
time and keep my hands to myself. And then you're seeing kids getting sent to the principal's office more often, or they're getting sent to, like you mentioned earlier, they're getting sent to the school psychologist more often, and
Right.
just kind of getting pushed out of the school environment and the school community. And it's like, where's that learning coming from?
One of the things that's so important too are naps.
Yes.
4-year-olds need a nap.
Yeah.
And if you're going to have a full day classroom, that
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be a consideration. And I don't
Yeah.
know. Um, I haven't had anecdotes. I had one or two. I don't know if it's across the board, but I don't know that these current teachers in the workforce that are not child development,
Mm-hmm.
majors as they became a teacher, that they understand the importance.
Yes.
All your kids are going to be acting up in the afternoon. Why?
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
Well,
I think they might need a nap. Um,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
things, just subtle things of understanding, a child's
Mm-hmm.
brain, and understand the physicality. They need to move. They need to be able
Mm-hmm.
to transition into other centers and areas in the classroom. And that's not always happening, which is unfortunate.
Yes. So in your experience kind of working with families and districts and, legislation and all of those things, what have been some successful strategies that you have seen that either school districts are doing, that either teachers are doing, that are kind of supporting early childhood education?
That's a great question. And I know that what I've said so far has been very um, negative, and I don't mean it to be, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the state of what it is. But there
Yes.
are districts that are really doing things appropriately, such
Mm-hmm.
as I think Ventura County has been working with the early childhood program, so preschool programs, with the school district, so that when TK classrooms are over, they will transition those children into a preschool center for the rest of the day until parents get off work and can pick them up, because that wraparound
Okay.
care is missing a lot.
Yes.
And, kids are out on the playground with all of the other kids at the school.
Yeah.
They're going up to fifth grade, all the fifth graders, everybody's there.
Yeah.
And it's scary. And they don't have playgrounds that are developmentally appropriate for them and the size, things like that. So there are districts that are doing that. Some districts already have preschool classrooms within their districts, and so they have classrooms that have bathrooms in
Yeah.
the classroom, and they've been built that way. So I think San Diego was one that really tried to incorporate more of the universal preschool type of model into the TK, and they brought in where classrooms were co-taught with the multiple subject teacher who maybe taught kindergarten, and then the lead preschool teacher in one of the classrooms to work together to teach. The downside of that model has been the preschool teacher has taken the lead because they know how to teach a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And we still see that pay disparity because they're not
Yes.
getting paid what that credentialed teacher is getting paid, even though they are the expert in that room. So there's a lot of that. It can be done. I think it has to involve collaboration, and it has to involve some type of thinking outside the box, because when we think of equity, there's so much of that not happening in this whole scenario. We know that in early childhood realm, the majority of teachers are teachers of color and they're women. And in the school district realm, the majority of teachers are white women. And so how do we get more teachers of color into classrooms, especially for those communities where they would represent that community? I mean, as a child, you want a teacher that looks like you. And the hope is that that teacher will understand your context and see you as a whole child. And that doesn't always happen. One of the things that at my institution that we've been doing heavily is we do everything in our program to support multilingual learners, because, I think under 9-year-olds in the whole United States, the number is staggering at how many children under the age of 9, their home language is not English.
Wow.
And I think it's like 60%. It's really high.
Oh my.
And in California, it's very high. And one of the things, California is really bad in our education system. When you look at national rankings, we rank 42nd in the nation in our K-12. Last year, we ranked 50 in children being able to read by 3rd grade. And we were single digits in our math scores.
That is rough, considering we used to be pretty, on the the forefront of education in California. Like they kind of like the gold standard, they always used to say.
Yeah.
And so to kind of, see where we are in terms of the data,
Yeah.
and the data in the entire United States right now is abysmal, but like,
Yeah. I mean, that's why the
yeah.
focus has been on STEM,
Mm-hmm.
a high focus on STEM. Rightly so. We need to increase that, and then our literacy. The
Yeah.
California's changed now. That I don't remember that the bill, um, but everyone's learning the science of reading,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm old enough where that's how I learned how to read. I mean, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
product of LA Unified School District, and I learned how to read with the science of reading. So it's not something new, but I know in
Yeah.
California, a lot of people are pushing back against it. Like it's this new thing, and it's really not.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of just going back to kind of the OG way that
yeah,
we used to with the phonics and the
yeah,
syntax and all of those things. And we kind of broke away from that of the last couple of years. I think it was like the 80s or 90s maybe we like
yeah,
broke into more like the balanced reading, and then
right.
we started doing 3Qing for some reason. Don't ask me why. I don't know
Yeah.
why that was a thing that we ever did.
And I have to say, I'm going to
Mhm.
call out my people that I think 30% of the CSU teacher preparation programs are still
Mhm.
using that to teach.
Ooh,
Yes.
okay.
And we know from research that that does not work, and
Mm.
it's being used. And that's what's being taught to teacher preparation programs. Pre-service teachers are learning 3Qing. So
No.
a lot needs to be changed. A lot
Yeah.
does. And
Yeah.
yeah, it really does. And so my hope is that we can make enough noise
Yes.
to try to affect some change in our current education system in California in
Yes.
particular. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something a little bit earlier about that wraparound care.
Yeah.
Um, because typically TK and kindergarten programs, they're usually half days. Sometimes you'll have the full day programs, but they're usually half day programs. And so, we don't currently have, buses that'll run for kids this age. And
Right.
so it kind of creates this additional burden. So yes, it is it's part of the school district, so it is free education. So like, early childhood education, it's preschools are expensive. And I've talked about this before, but you really only get voice and choice in early childhood preschool education if you have, the funds to do so.
Right.
So if you're, middle class or lower income, you don't really have a whole lot of options. If you qualify for it, you can get,
Yeah.
CSVP, which is California State Preschool Programs, or you can get into Head Starts,
Right.
um, or you can do like a family friend and neighbor type situation.
Right.
But other than that, you don't get much choice unless you are kind of like more upper middle class,
Yeah.
and you have the money to choose, like, oh, I want to go to a Reggio school, I want to go to Montessori. Like you
Yeah.
get more options. I know in some districts as well, they're also kind of pushing that kids have to go to TK. So, some
Yeah.
parents literally don't get to have the choice, even if they want to have an extra year of preschool instead of TK.
Hmm.
I'm hearing that parents kind of don't have a choice in that matter, which is also really concerning because I think that you should still have a choice.
Yeah.
It's still optional, but the fact that parents don't have a choice is concerning to me. But yeah, also that wraparound care. So if you don't have a choice, you have to do TK, but TK is only half day, but you have to work your full day. So then you have to find,
Yes.
either after school programs for this age range, which is also harder to find.
Right.
Or you just have to figure something else out for the other half of that day, which causes an additional amount of issues for parents to find care that is developmentally appropriate.
Right.
um, I've worked for programs that do after school programs, and they're usually not people who are qualified to uh, teach children generally. They're usually kids who just got out of high school, or people who don't have background in education, which I think is fine in general, as long as you get the information, the developmental information on who you're dealing with. I think you
Right.
don't have to be a teacher to do after school care. but oftentimes they're not getting this additional information. And so it does make me even more concerned to think about after school care for these very young children. Like, where are they going? Who are they going to be with? Is it going to be like very mixed, like you were saying? Is it going to be fifth graders on the same playground with these newly, 3 and 4-year-olds who are so little?
Yeah.
you know just so little. And what are we doing with these children? What is that wraparound care? What is that continuity of care looking like for these young children? And going back to what you mentioned before, what kind of trauma is going to be happening to these young children, especially if we don't have people who are qualified and know what they're doing when it comes to working with these very different age ranges?
Yes.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. And it's, that's where I think the implementation and the rollout maybe was not as well thought out, because
Yes.
so much of this is part of early childhood, and it's so important. And one of the struggles we have as a field, and this is not even just nationally, it's internationally, is that we're seen as caregivers and not as educators.
Yes. Yes.
And so we're not taken as professionals, and we're not taken as teacher preparation, even though that's exactly what we do. And I would say in my program that we do it better than some of the teacher preparation programs are doing. And I'm an undergraduate program, but I'm giving my students pedagogical skills.
Yes.
And I think that's so valuable, because when you understand a young child's brain and what they are able to learn and how they can learn at certain ages, you know exactly how to teach them.
Yes. Yes.
And, if you're just getting these general, science of reading principles and what does that look like, you are not getting that in-depth learning of, okay, so with the science of reading, if I'm, doing phonics, what does that look like for this age, for a 4-year-old? What does it look like for a 6-year-old? What does it look like for an 8-year-old? And they are going to be different. But if you understand that, I think it makes teaching a little bit easier, because you know where to go. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, my first couple of years of like teaching in the classroom, and, in California, you can still be getting your 12 units and start teaching early childhood, which that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's a situation that was happening. And I remember just like being in the classroom with my 2-year-olds, and, I didn't understand why my circle time was always like, it always was chaotic. And I was like, why won't they just sit down and listen to me? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, yeah, dude, you planned like 5 things to do in a circle time with 2-year-olds. Like, their attention span just isn't there. Or I'd be confused at like, I was trying to like talk to them during snack time, trying to model conversations, and I'd ask them questions, and they would respond with things like mommy and daddy. And I'm like, I didn't like, that's not. And I would just be like really confused, like, why aren't they like having conversations? Why don't they talk to each other? What? And then, I go through more early childhood development and theory and pedagogical things, and now I can pretty confidently explain like, oh yeah, that's why they're not doing that, because there's so many other things that are kind of going on in their developmental phase. Like, yeah, they're not ready to play with each other. They're playing next to each other, and that's just developmentally how they play at this stage. It's still
Parallel
very valuable.
Yes.
They
are learning.
They're learning so much. It's very valuable. They will get to that point, and we can model it, and we can show them, and we can encourage it. But they're where they are in their terms of play right now is very normal, very fine. They're still learning.
That's the thing. The other big thing I think that's so important is play-based inquiry. And I think a lot of schools do not understand that. And I think that's where our children in our school system are struggling, because they don't have the ability to problem solve or to think critically, because they're just trying to pass these high stakes tests, right? And that's what they're taught. You're taught the test so that you can pass the test so that my school can get money. It's, simply said, but there's so much research showing that if I give a child a toy and I tell them, okay, these are the things, you push these buttons and this is what happens, and I give them the toy, they're going to just push those buttons and say, okay, yeah, and then they're done
Yeah.
with it. But if I say, ooh, look at how these buttons, I wonder what they do. And I hand it to them, and then they can figure out, and they'll figure out even more things that I didn't know, because they're manipulating it or playing with it. And that inquiry based learning is so important. Whereas somebody outside might say, they're just playing with a toy. Like what's the big deal? You know? But that integrated nature of that, and they're using motor skills, they're using vocabulary, you know, they might be using some science, because depending on the manipulation. So many things are happening in that one little interchange that I think a lot of other educators do not understand.
Yes. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And, you know, I say this all the time, but I take the skills and the things that I've learned in child development, just human development in general, and it has been applicable to everything I've done in my life, you know, whether working at nonprofits, you know, whether I'm presenting at a conference, whether I'm networking, everything, you know, I do in my life, my knowledge of just how children learn, how people learn, and what's going on, and just it's so applicable to so many different aspects of life. And when I did my master's program, I did it in law, which seems random, but I swear there was a reason for it. But when I was doing it, I used my background and knowledge in human development to then kind of make these legal arguments of, well, yeah, when we're talking about juvenile justice, the reason why these don't work is because developmentally where they are, or the reason why we're seeing these behaviors is because as an adolescent, this is where they are developmentally. And it's like, we can't expect them to behave really any other differently, because that's just not, their brains aren't wired that way. Their brains are wired for right here, right now. Their brains are wired for what's going to feel good right here, right now. Rather, they're not thinking about their future in that same context. At least they're not doing it consistently enough, right? They might do it sometimes, but their brains aren't wired that way.
Right. But having that understanding, I agree with you, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no,
it
you're
just
good.
makes me think of, so I used to teach in a master's program for child development. I taught some classes, and one of the classes I taught was attachment. And I don't know if you know who Dr. Bruce Perry is.
Yes.
Okay, so there was a book I used, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. That's the name of the book. And it has these little scenarios of some of the patients that he's worked with. And one of them was a boy who was raised as a dog. But the other part, and what you said that triggered it for me, was when I was, I did a year in New York at Columbia. And I was working, my advisor at the time was a clinical psychologist, and we were working with the Vera Juvenile Justice in New York City. And we were working with youth that were incarcerated, and we were doing family therapy with them. You know, when they were in jail, we would bring the family to the jail, and we'd work with them in family therapy. But a lot of juveniles are lacking that attachment. And then when you add in foster care children, it even gets extended more, because they don't have those attachments. And so there was one story in his book where there was a young woman that was in the foster system. She eventually had a child, but did not bond with the child. She did everything right, where she took the child to the medical appointments and, you know, but the child was not thriving. And so interventions happened where she learned to attach to the baby and to learn to attach to an adult, and that baby started to thrive. But not understanding that as a juvenile, you know, I think we bring in our own context into our situations. Like, well, why can't you do this? Why can't you sit there? Why can't you listen? But I think that concept of the whole child, it extends through our whole life, and really looking at a whole person. I use it on my husband all the time.
I use it in my relationship too.
Yeah, and he knows it. He's like, I know what you're doing.
Yeah. Yes, I do it with my friends. They
Yeah.
hate me, but they'll be like, "Oh, I'm going through this breakup, or I'm going through this thing," and I'll start asking my strategic questions, and they're like,
Yes.
"Oh, you're asking the questions again." I'm like, "Well,
Yes.
they work, don't they?
Yes.
I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just asking questions
Yeah.
strategically."
Yeah. That's right. You need to figure it out.
Yeah, you'll figure it out, but I'll
Yeah.
just guide you along the way with
Yeah.
some questions.
That's right.
I
That's
have
right.
one last question for you,
Sure.
Dr. Kennedy, and that is, how do you reimagine education?
I just had this conversation with my husband yesterday, and we really do need to overhaul our system in California.
Yes.
One of the issues, you know, I struggle with this because a lot of times it comes to politics, power, and money.
Mm.
And these districts spend millions of dollars on these box curriculum.
Yep.
And I don't know that there has been any really efficacious studies looking at the curriculum. I mean, I think most of us know, especially in early childhood, we know that handing a child a worksheet is really not appropriate for that child to
Yep.
learn. And that's what's being done across our system. And I think we need to think of ways to teach children, even if we use, I teach assessments, right? Earlier I mentioned I'm like the assessment person in our program, doing a lot with game-based assessments. I can give a child an iPad that's teaching the child math, and whether the child speaks English or Spanish or Korean or Farsi, whatever that child's language is, if I hand that child an iPad with a math game, they would be able to do that. But at the end, I would be able to see where that child is on math. And as a teacher, that gives me so much information.
Yes.
But I'm not sitting there writing out on the board or, on a transparency or on, a whiteboard or something, things that I want them to copy that they don't understand. So I think we need to overhaul our system and really, really look at something that incorporates, and again, in early childhood, we integrate teaching. If you're a teacher in a classroom, you can't just sit there and teach math, in elementary in particular, right? You don't have the time in the day to just focus on one topic area. I might have a science lesson that includes language and vocabulary, that includes some kind of social interactions with peers. It would incorporate and integrate all of these things. I think in early childhood, especially, the social emotional development and learning is part of our teaching. And then the classroom is also a teacher in early childhood.
It is.
But when you go into a school district, that is not the case. You have a teacher who's the boss, and they're dictating. And regardless of how you learn, if you learn differently, too bad. That type of thing.
Get on the train.
Yeah. But it's not the teacher's fault. I don't blame the teacher for that. And I know that young teachers, I collected some data, but young teachers will go in with all these high hopes and all this knowledge, and then they're handed this curriculum and they're told, no, don't do what you want to do. You have to do this.
Yep.
And a really good teacher knows that won't be the best way, so they will find ways to go around it to get the result. But it takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work.
And you're not always rewarded for that. Sometimes you're reprimanded because you're not doing the testing at the times you're supposed to do it, because everything is, scheduled out for you.
Yep.
And if your children are not where they need to be, so you're trying to build them up, you might delay your testing, but that's not what the schools want you to do.
They're trying to get that funding, so
yeah.
you need to do the things so they can get the funding.
It's going to take legislation, honestly. I've learned that it's going to take some kind of legislation to do that. But the other part is, I'm trying to write a grant to look at what's happening in schools, TK in particular, but even looking at the different curriculum that's being used. Why is everyone in California so horrible at math? I don't understand it. I liked math, but I had good math teachers. That's the end. At the end of the day, I tell my students, you're not bad in math. You've just had really bad math teachers.
Yeah.
So we reteach them math in our program, and they love math now when they graduate from us because they understand it and they're able to teach children what they know. So there's so much about it. I think the way the system works is they focus so much on the subject matter. So take algebra, take statistics, take science, but you don't know how to teach that. But you're qualified to teach it because you took it.
Basically, yeah.
I mean, that's how you pass the exam, and you can teach that,
Yep.
So yep. I think some of those things have to change, and the focus has to be on educators and educating more than just learning the subject.
Absolutely. More than just knowing the subject, knowing that developmental stage of who you're working with. I think when you're really proficient in that, you can teach them almost anything because you know where their brains are and you know how to talk to their specific brain. And you know exactly where these students are. And again, when we know development, we know that it's not very just strict and stringent. Just because you are 8 years old now, you should be able to do the checklist of these things.
Right.
We know that that's not how development works, right?
Right.
Just because you are this age, you could be advanced in one area and behind in other areas. Like, we just kind of know developmentally a general idea of where you might be. And then you get to know the student, and you get to know exactly where they are by getting to know them and getting to know how they learn, and what things they learn best in, and really making learning fun. At that point, it just starts to become fun because, okay, I know this kid, I know my class, I know where they are developmentally, I know where I want them to be. Great. Now we can get to that end point, but we can get there in ways that are fun, that are appropriate, that engage them in new and novel ways. Like, bringing fun back into education.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But it's, you ask any individual, who is your favorite teacher? And they'll right off the bat have an answer for you.
Yeah.
I don't know how others, I don't know if it's just me, but I only remember a very select number of teachers in my whole K through 12 system. There's a bunch of teachers I had. I couldn't recall their names for you because they were bad. They were bad.
Yeah. I feel that. I think the teachers that stand out were the teachers that made it fun, that made it exciting, that made me want to learn things. Even things, I do like 2 classes on Shakespeare. I did not care about Shakespeare before, I had the specific teacher, but then I had the specific teacher, and he made learning so much fun that I ended up just taking other classes with this teacher because I was like, yeah, I'll take, let's learn about Shakespeare. Yes. I know way too much about Shakespeare right now. But it was so fun to learn these things. And now I have favorite Shakespeare plays. Like, it's amazing. But if you would have told me that, years before, then I'm like, I don't care about Shakespeare. Like,
what am I going to do with that? Who's going to hire me, right?
Right. What am I going to do with that information? But now I know a lot. And it was just really fun. It was exciting. And he taught it in just this way that spoke to the way that I learned. It was amazing. But thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy, for joining me. This has been an absolutely beautiful conversation. Where can my audience find you? Are you working on anything?
So I am at Cal Poly Pomona, and I'm in the Early Childhood Studies program. I'm actually the chair of the program. I think you have my email. Do you want me to say it here?
I can put all the contact information you'd like right in our show notes. So wherever you want. We can do that.
So my email you have. I don't do social media. I honestly do not have the bandwidth and time to do that. I used to, but I do not anymore. And I'm also part of Peach. Peach is a collaborative. It's partnerships in education, articulation, and collaboration of higher ed. And so Peach started in LA County with all the community colleges and the CSUs and private institutions in early childhood programs. And we've been doing this since 2010. We have several work groups. Right now, we have a work group that is working on the revision of the child development permit with CTC. So we have people on that. So we are collaborative. We're now statewide. We have a lot of people in Northern California and some in Central, not as many in the South, San Diego area. But we've met every month for since 2010. So it's been pretty long time. But we are doing a lot. We have people on the CAIC policy division, and we do advocacy, and we do a lot of work with the California Department of Education and CTC and others to try to affect change. And we're stepping it up now with advocacy and trying to get to policymakers and try to get to legislators. So that's our next step. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'll link to all those great things in our show notes. So if you're curious to find out more about Peach or find out more about the programs, you can click on those links down there. Again, Dr. Kennedy, I want to thank you so much for joining me. This has just been an amazing conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and days.
And we'll do that.
Yay!
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
And thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I love doing it, so I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Thank you so much for tuning into Conscious Pathways. Please like, follow, and subscribe to Conscious Pathways wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And if you like video podcasts, you can subscribe on YouTube and get notified every time I post a new podcast episode. And don't forget to share and leave a rating or review. It really does help the podcast to grow and reach more listeners just like you. And until next time, don't forget to navigate your conscious journey with courage and kindness. And I'll see you there for more transformative conversations in education. Bye.